Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tactical Plastic Report, where I talk about Army Men, a game of tactical plastic. It's been a little while since I've sat down and I've talked about this game, but it's a new year, I've got new ideas, new projects, and there is something about the game that, for a lot of folks, I don't think they've really trigged to it because, well, it's sort of buried into the Game Master section, and it may not be obvious when you look at the art, when you look at some of the other videos I've done, or when you just really think about how you would play this game. And so I wanted to talk about it this week because there is a really important aspect about it that I think provides a lot of opportunity for growth and a lot of interesting, missions you can have for your players if you expand your mind and go past the usual conventions of genre that people assume this game has. And that's where I wanted to give a shout out to something that inspired me to do this for my game when I sat down and I started making it, which is Spycraft. For folks who have never heard of this game, you've never seen it, Spycraft is essentially a D20 James Bond experience. It came out right around the time that D20 Modern was riding really, really high, and it was probably one of the most expansive, quote-unquote, modern games I'd ever played. And way in the back of this game, there was an entire section where you got a one-page genre breakdown, and it was different ways you could run this game in different genres. So you had, suspense, horror, traditional mystery. You had, international spycraft where things were supposed to be very subtle or very quiet. And then you had things like Hong Kong action theater where things were going to be very smash mouth, very, very punch and grab. And it was probably 10 to 15 different genres that you could take this game, completely packaged as it was, with no changes made except, in your mind and the way you describe things, and you could just keep things fresh, keep things new. And you could do these as separate campaigns, or you could do these as, different chapters of the same campaign if you wanted to genre hop as you went along. And that was something that I thought gave it a lot of flavor and gave it a lot of, replay value. It meant that even though folks had played this game one way, they didn't immediately have to jump to a different RPG as a palate cleanser. They could just do this a different way next time. And that's something I wanted to provide my players for Army Men, which is why if you dig into the Game Master section, you'll see that I do talk about genre in this game. And as I did mention, it has basically a 1950s monster movie vibe crossed with Starship Troopers when you look at the original core game, how it's written for the central premise of you are a bunch of plastic people living in a plastic world, and your collection of nations has banded together to protect each other from the threat of the Vespoids and these gigantic insectoid creatures that are running amok. And if you just want to have that feeling where, you're a bunch of, tried and true troopers who are going out into the field and pushing back this insectoid menace, you can do that. You can do an entire campaign of that where all you do is mission after mission of fighting giant bugs, bombing nests, saving towns, things like that. But there are other ways to play the game, and there are other things you can do. For example, running Army Men as a horror game is not very hard, because let's face it, fighting giant bugs is terrifying if you just change up the way you're doing descriptions, if you put them in different situations, if you give your players relatively little ammunition and put them in a nest, you are going to see people start panicking really quickly. And probably the best example for that one is if you just treat the Vespoids more like the xenomorphs from Alien, you have a whole different game on your hands without having to change any of the mechanics, without having to do anything differently, especially since we already have a morale system. You can very easily adapt that into just watching your players break when they're faced with horror after horror after horror. And especially if you want to pick up some of the expanded monsters and creatures we had in other releases, you'll have things like reanimated troopers whose faces have melted off and they can't quite remember who they are, for folks who like Frankenstein crossed with Universal Soldier. There are not giant, but larger than average robots using alien technology that no one can understand that detonate when their programming reaches a certain level. There's opportunity for a lot of terrifying things. But beyond horror, you also have genres like mystery or noir for folks who have watched older videos on the channel or who picked up a copy of Ungentlemanly Warfare, a baker's dozen of booby traps. the introductory story. Oh no, sorry, not Baker's Dozen Booby Traps. It was Medals of Honor is the collection I'm thinking of. And Medals of Honor opens up with a very cloak and dagger, quite literally, story about, intelligence operatives, betraying their erstwhile allies, working for other governments. And that's also a genre you can do with Army Men if you want to. If you don't want to deal with fighting giant bugs at all, you think that's kind of passé, you want to leave that in the background, that's just something going on elsewhere in the world, you could absolutely run a game where your players are all taking on missions of assassination, where they're all spies, where they're all playing this game against each other, trying to figure out who is actually running covert operations, who is making what deals amongst the underworld. And again, if you want to do something aside from the Game of Thrones being played by the various nations, you could also do games of cops and robbers. There are profiteers, there are war criminals going on throughout this entire conflict. You could very easily have your players either as people trying to become heads of organized crime syndicates, or you could have them as forces of the law trying to stop these syndicates from operating, trying to get them to stop hurting people, stop running guns, stop running drugs, actually recruit their members into more noble causes, since they clearly have skills that would be very useful right about now. And this spirals on out of control. There are other genres that the base book doesn't really support yet that I'd love to just set up extra books for. One that I wanted to do was sort of a Weird West setup where you get out past the nations that already exist, and we get into some of those other plastic toys that we've seen of, the Cowboys and Indians toys that were released, or the Civil War toys that were released, and provide a whole different setup of now you have, cavalrymen on their plastic horses, and they're fighting battles with cannons, and they're just trying to deal with all of the things that happen out on the fringes when you're not as involved with the parts of the world that the rest of the game might be. Maybe they're off dealing with creatures that just don't come near civilization, for folks who wanted to know where all the dinosaurs are and when we're going to get plots for them. And if you wanted to get a little crazy with it, you could even do a Jurassic Park style game using Army Men, where they're trying to breed these creatures, and if we want to steal a plot from one of the movies, they might even be trying to train them and break them to be used as cavalry mounts in the ongoing fight against the Vespoids. Things can get as wild and crazy and ridiculous as you want them to, and that's part of the design. I wanted to bake that into the game so that you could do a whole bunch of different genres without really doing a whole lot of extra work on your end, and especially without doing any mechanical reinvention. I wanted players to be able to look at whatever genre they really enjoyed or whatever plots they were thinking of and go, hey, could we run that with this game? Without having to really break a sweat as the game master. And that's something I wanted to touch on because, again, it's kind of buried in the book when I get to establishing genre and just talking directly to the game master before they get started making their own missions. And I feel like a lot of people will see the book, or they'll see some of the other videos I've done on it, and they'll just assume there's only one way to play this game, and it's really only meant for a very narrow field of stories you can tell. When, in fact, I was trying to do the opposite of that. So, if that's something that interests you, by all means, pick up the book, pick up some of the supplements that have come out for it, and give it a read, look through it, see if there's something that is unusual about it that really appeals to you, see if there's a type of story that you maybe didn't think you were going to run with this, but now you kind of want to. And before I get going this week, I do have a request for everybody. If you made it this far in the video, what genre would you like to see a guidebook written for Army Men? Whether it's horror, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's even fantasy, if we want to get some of the really weird toys out there and expansions. Because I do have some things involving metal men and their sorceress masters, which I was hoping to get to eventually. I have mentioned it once or twice in other interviews, but these are all options and things that I would be happy to move forward and include. I just need to know there's folks out there who are interested in them. So, as always, like, share, subscribe, do all those YouTube things, because that helps us get the video out to more people, helps more people find out about Army Men. And till next time, this is Tactical Plastic Report, signing off.